Yes, thank you very much, Beatrice, for this introduction. Thank you for having me, and I'm honored to be presenting at this interesting workshop. Let me also congratulate Fernando Saca on his excellent presentation and the operation of these nearly 800 electric buses. I used to visit Chile about 2 years ago, and I think there were about 100 electric buses by then. And by then it really has been grown very fast. So very impressive stuff. And I think something to learn from, because in the Netherlands and in Europe, the amounts of electric buses are not that high. So I will be talking about a topic of electric mobility for personal vehicles more than for buses. And maybe there's something to learn vice versa, maybe also, because in Europe and in the Netherlands, we've made great progress in developing electric mobility and the market for electric mobility. So maybe next slide. So let me start off with the international outlook figures from the International Energy Agency. What you see here is the growth of electric vehicles worldwide. And what you can see also in the colors, in blue is China, in green is Europe, and US is in orange. You see how these figures are really growing very rapidly. And sales are growing up to 60% per year on an annual basis. So that's fast. And we realize, of course, this is only a very small slice of the total market. It's still under 1% of the total market accumulated. But still, there's an enormous growth. And if this continues, then you can imagine that there will be sincere market shares for electric vehicles. Next slide. There's a number of drivers for that, which I'd like to show. So there's 4 big drivers which we see. Can we have the next slide? So obviously the most important one is the battery prices, which have gone down. And actually this is quite an old figure already. So what you see there is the blue bar is the battery cost goal, which was set by Department of Energy, I believe. And you can see if you reach that point, that electric vehicles will become more competitive in price, even in sales price compared to fossil or diesel engine vehicles. And what you see also by 2020, we're nearing that battery cost goal, and it basically means that electric vehicles are coming into comparable price ranges of regular vehicles. That's interesting, but of course, the total cost of ownership is leading here. So next slide, please. Basically, electric vehicles are basically iPads on wheels, right? It's a bunch of software. There's basically very limited moving parts. That means also very low maintenance, and the only maintenance you get at some point is switching to different tires, maybe, and you have to do something with your brakes. But the maintenance levels are so low, and that's what we see in the Netherlands. That maintenance is really so low that a lot of car companies have to rethink their business models, because their business models are also based on the maintenance factor of vehicles. So that all changes. Next slide, please. Then the other thing, which we see in the Netherlands and Europe, is that there's a boom in the available electric vehicle models. So let's say 5 years ago, you would have the options to buy 5 or 10 models which would be suitable. And for family cars, really, there was no really good electric alternative. By now, I just counted, there's about 40 to 50 electric vehicle models you can choose from. Also SUVs, sports cars, sedans, family cars, etc. So on the whole range of models which you require on the whole automotive market in all segments, there's serious alternatives, and you've got options, and that's going to be very important. Next slide, please. The last one is that there's been an enormous development of charging solutions. So that's always been the main topic, right? Can I charge my car at some point? And that's been a main barrier for electric vehicles. And I think in Europe, and particularly the Netherlands and Norway, have been examples where we see how that can be solved. And in the picture, you see, well, an illustration of a fast charging network, an ultra-fast charging network, charging with 350 kilowatts, Basically, that allows a personal vehicle to charge within about 10 minutes and be able to get home. So that's not that longer than your regular refueling time. So what we see is that charging has really been developed fast. And I'll show some examples in the Netherlands. That's been a major factor in getting the market for electric vehicles accelerate in the Netherlands. Next slide, please. So these are the four driving forces, I would say. The low battery prices leading to lower premium cost of electric vehicles. The low maintenance and energy costs, of course, which really lowers the total cost of ownership. And that's also what we saw with Fernando in the last presentation. The availability of models which provides consumer choices and all charging opportunities at home, at work, and at highways. Next slide, please. So let's look at the EU, the European Union. What's the market share of electric vehicles at the moment? In 2020, that was 8%. And we have to always make the distinction in full battery electric vehicles, which is about 4%, and the plug-in hybrid electric vehicles, which also have an internal combustion engine. So they both have about 4%, and you can see a trend that plug-ins are again growing a lot, but still it's 50-50 between the two, and it's going to be the question what's going to be the future. Obviously, there's a big push by particularly German and French automakers to keep plug-ins, but there's also a push to keep it to full battery electric vehicles, and this is really a struggle for the dominant design. So typically the companies leading are Germany, France, Italy, and Sweden, but also Norway, which is not in this graph. Next slide, please. So in the Netherlands, you can see that the sheer numbers of the sales. In dark green, you see the full electric battery electric vehicles, which mount up to 144,000 vehicles. And you see also the plug-in hybrid vehicles, which sold a lot in the early years until 2016, and then more or less faded, but still are 100,000 in the market. So in total, we've got on our roads 250,000 electric vehicles combined. So that's a 3% of the total amount in the Netherlands. So still small, but the market share of sales is close to 10% in the last couple of years. So what we see really happening is that this is really taking off, and with the new models coming in and the subsidy programs really subsidizing it, we think this will grow. And the ambition is that by 2030, so in 10 years' time, every car sold should be electric. So that's 10 years' time, and that's the ambition of the ministry at least. And one of the main incentives, the main drivers there, is the charging infrastructure programs. Next slide, please. Next slide. So one thing which is in 2019, the best sold car was not a Volkswagen Polo or a Honda Accord or a Toyota Yaris. The best sold car was a Tesla Model 3. And not just winning by a small margin. It was better sold than the number 2 and 3 runner-up together. So this was really a huge hype, and in particular, let's say the more wealthy neighborhoods in Amsterdam and the Netherlands, you will see Model 3 vehicles all over the place. So this is becoming really a very serious contender for the market and for established firms. And it's completely normal, legitimate to buy an electric vehicle in the Netherlands. And in certain environments, it's a bit strange if you do not buy an electric vehicle. So you see how there's a tipping point, and we're moving to that point where it's the new normal, so to say. Next slide, please. So here's what you see on charging infrastructure. So this is the Netherlands. It's a bit of there's a lot of data in this graph, but I'll try to break it down. So where do we charge? Where do all these 250,000 electric vehicles charge? Well, most of them charge at home. So 150,000 households have the luxury to have their own driveway and being able to put a charger there and being able to charge at their own house. So basically they charge every day. they never go to a gas station anymore because they never drive more than 100 or 150 kilometers a day. So basically, they just plug in, they come home, plug in, 10 seconds later, they're having dinner. So this is really a solution which works for quite a lot of people. However, only 30% of all households in the Netherlands have their own driveway. So that means that 70% of the households are dependent on a different solution. And this is a major issue. So for that reason, particularly the municipalities and cities made a whole program to place charging points on the street, publicly available, publicly accessible. So by now, in the Netherlands, there's about 60,000 public charging points available where you can charge with a charge card. You can access it. And it's really exclusive only for electric vehicles. So that's quite a lot, and it's probably one of the most densely operated public charge infrastructures worldwide. What you can also see is that there's about 210 or 220,000 public charge points in the Netherlands and 250,000 electric vehicles. So that's basically a one-to-one ratio which we have at the moment, and we think in the future that will go a little bit down. So you need less chargers for electric vehicles. Also, we've got a national coverage in fast chargers, either 50 kilowatts or 100 kilowatts, and these systems are coming available in the rest of the Netherlands. If you've got range anxiety and your battery is nearly down, in most cases you can find a fast charger within a range of 20 to 30 kilometers. So that should be no problem. So the main drivers are for this charging infrastructure. Who's organizing that? Who's making that work? Well, first of all, the municipalities, who have very strict regulations for air quality and climate. So they've been pushing this and investing in it. So these municipalities have been a great role. And the second one is the network operators, the electric network operators, because they see that if they do not organize it in a smart way, they run into trouble without carrying out smart charging. But I'll come to that later. Next slide, please. So apart from personal vehicles, there's also commercial vehicles, which is about 10% of all vehicles, 800,000. And that's where you see very slow. So it's logistic companies, taxi companies. That's a very slow market in the Netherlands. Much harder to increase the amount of electric vehicles there. That's what we see. And we see this in a lot of countries in Europe. And but the trend here is, and that's relevant, I think, to mention. The trend is by 2025, there will be 30 or 40 cities which basically close their inner centers for vehicles that are not electric. And that inner center can be quite small, but can also be quite large, and that means that a lot of vehicles are affected. So if you're a commercial vehicle by 2025, if you're a carpenter or you've got a service agent, or you've got a truck, you will need to abide to these rules. So for all these companies, there's a big incentive to start thinking about, should I switch to electric now or maybe wait until 2024, 2025? So that's got to be a major driver in the Netherlands. Next slide, please. So this is an example of this zero emission initiative. This is Amsterdam. You couldn't recognize it. Let's say that the big green area is the populated area, and Amsterdam is about 1 million population. It's probably one of the suburbs of Santiago de Chile, so that's much bigger. It's a small city, and you see there in the blue range. That's the part with all the canals. That's the old city center, which you know from pictures maybe or visits. That's going to be in 2022. That should be electric already for buses. Then the green area should be electric for buses, for boats, for taxis, for logistic companies. So that's really quite a large area already, and that probably affects 200,000 electric vehicles already. And then they've got the green metropolitan region around Amsterdam, and basically that should be completely electric, not only for logistic companies, not only taxi drivers, but for everyone living there. And that's going to be a major challenge, because there's going to be a lot of families and households which do not have the investment capacity to switch. and there's probably not going to be that much second-hand cars also electric. So it's going to be a challenge, but this is the ambition, and it really drives forward a number of the initiatives which we see in the Netherlands. Next slide, please. So one exemplary project is to switch the taxi sector to electric. Now, in Amsterdam, there's about 3,000 to 4,000 taxis, and they should all turn electric by 2025. When they started, this was done in a voluntary agreement. So the taxi companies, they signed to do this, but in return, they requested to have some subsidies. They requested that there would be fast chargers, and they requested that taxi stands where they can pick up clients, they should be made zero emission. And that's what the government did. So by now, 3 years after their signing of this voluntary agreement, the amount of taxis grew from about 150 to I think around 1,000 now. So we're well on their way to reach this 3,000 to 4,000 electric taxis in still 5 years to go. So what we see here also is these cars drive a lot. These taxis have a lot of mileage. And because they're electric, their total cost of ownership is really becoming much more interesting for this particular sector, much like the bus sector, where a lot of kilometers driven adds to a good total cost of ownership and makes electric drive very interesting to switch to. Next slide, please. Another thing that the city of Amsterdam did, and I would advise this to any city who's planning to start developing public charging infrastructure, is make a good analysis and monitoring tool. And this is a tool that we developed at the University of Applied Sciences, but there's different ones around. And basically, this tells you continuously how is this charging infrastructure used. So here you see a map of Amsterdam with in the center the canals, and this is all the populated areas and the neighborhoods. And you see all the dots basically show which charging points are there, which are used, which are occupied. And analyzing them from a utilization point of view allows you to think about where to place new ones. If they're used well enough, if you should apply smart charging, yes or no, and you can make plans for the future. So I would advise this to any municipality to start developing these kinds of monitoring maps. Next slide, please. So basically concluding, I think in the Netherlands and in Europe, we've got a lot of experience in switching to electric for in a personal transport, right, for regular cars. And the conditions for success, I would say, in the Netherlands there's been huge, well, quite big subsidy schemes for lease cars. A second driving factor and success factor has been the development of charging infrastructure for these persons that cannot have their own driveway and are dependent on public chargers. And the third one is interoperable charging. So you can use charging points, all the public ones with a charging card, and you can use them all. And this is different in every country. And I think this is a good thing to have this all interoperable. Second, I think the tipping point for electric drivers definitely coming closer. For buses, I think it's a no-brainer, more or less. For electric vehicles, personal transport, it's getting there in a few years' time. So it's already so that electric vehicles are becoming the best sold cars in the Netherlands and also in Norway. Subsidy schemes can help, but by 2025 they should be out of place, and it should be really without subsidy possible. And with all the models on the market, it really provides choices. Now, there are 3 hurdles I would like to mention for the further development of this. The first one, for the large-scale introduction of electric vehicles, is materials. And of course, Chile is very well aware of the opportunities there also for the mining of lithium and cobalt. These are probably 2 of the more important materials to look at. I think there's a big opportunity there for countries like Chile to see if you can do something in the value chain. Second is the sourcing of electric vehicles. In the Netherlands, we've got waiting lists for electric vehicles up to half a year to a year. There's simply not enough electric vehicles around to meet demand. And what we see is the growth in other countries. It's going to be a race who can get the electric vehicles which are available. That's at this moment the situation. So that's going to be interesting how the scale up will work out. Last one, the big issue and challenge for a lot of countries scaling up with electric vehicles is developing also this charging infrastructure, be it fast chargers, ultra fast, or regular chargers at all kinds of locations. We should make use that this charging infrastructure is not the bottleneck. So that's it. Any questions?